Good evening, everyone, to those of you in the chamber and those tuning in online. A warm welcome back to CYP. Before I get into the agenda tonight, just a few quick updates. The first one being that the Youth in Scrutiny initiative has begun this month with our first youth inspector contributing to the Healthier Community Scrutiny panel last night. Unfortunately, today, our young inspector is unable to attend tonight's meeting, but we do have Keza Hallam, her participation worker, who is in tonight's meeting and may wish to contribute during the proceedings. So you're very welcome, Keza. So on tonight's agenda, we haven't got that many agenda items, but the ones we will go through are quite important. Starting with an update on the important topic that is the mental health of our children and young people. Thank you for the very useful update, and I'm sure members enjoyed going through that and seeing those developments, and I look forward to hearing people's questions on the contents of that report. We will also be getting some task group updates from Councillor Kirby's task group on mental health issues, particularly concerning girls with eating disorders in school, and boys as well. And we'll also be hearing from Councillor Austin on his task group concerning the youth offer in the borough and Young People's Foundation, before we then move on to the departmental update and any questions regarding the recent updates. Just one last update for me before we jump into the agenda. This is just a reminder that for this meeting, there isn't a performance monitoring report because there was such a small gap between last meeting and this meeting that there weren't any updates to deliver this time round. And so that's why there isn't that performance monitoring report. So those are all the initial updates from me. So let's get straight into the agenda, starting off with any apologies for absence.
I have any apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Is Billy online?
Yeah, I'm online, yeah.
Is Billy Hayes online?
Yes.
Yeah, 'cause I said-
Yes,
Yeah.
Councillor Hayes is tuning in online due to a injury, and I'm sure I speak for everyone in the chamber in wishing him a speedy recovery, so that we can be blessed by his presence in the chamber. Are the minutes from the previous meeting agreed?
Great.
Brilliant. Okay, so now I will move on to agenda item 4, the Children and Young People's Mental Health Report. And I will hand over to Elizabeth for a short presentation on the current model being used before we then move on to questions. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just speak for a moment whilst Stella finds the presentation, which she has kindly said she would be able to share on screen with those in the chamber and also those at home. So just as a brief introduction, this report was written by Keith Shipman, who is our Head of Education Inclusion, and also Jacqueline Wilson, who is our Interim CAMS Transformation Manager and Commissioner for the South West London Integrated Commissioning Board, demonstrating that strong partnership work in this space of children and young people's mental health. And hopefully online we have Victoria Cameron, also from the South West London Integrated Commissioning Board, who will be supporting me with answering questions. And I can see Stella is just trying to make sure that we can share that presentation. It is in the papers that were previously circulated. So if you do have access to those papers and you just wanted to start looking at them, they're on. It's on. The presentation starts on page 15. Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Okay, so before I sort of did a brief introduction to the paper, which is will give an overview of the key issues faced by children and young people in Merton with regards to their mental health and the support that we have available for them, we thought that this short presentation could be helpful to sort of give a little bit of context for the framework within which we are operating. So back in 2015, as you may have read in our report, the government published guidance which was called Future in Mind, and it aimed to transform the way that CAMS, our child and adolescent mental health services, are delivered nationally, and asking us to look at our structures and the investment needed. In 2018 in Merton, we adopted this I Thrive model, which enabled us to think about the transformation that we wanted to take next to improve services and outcomes for children and young people. So the I Thrive model was recommended by the government in their Future in Mind guidance. It's been developed by the Tavistock and by the Portman National Health Service Foundation Trust, as well as the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families. And is essentially a person-centred model of mental health support for children and young people, focusing on their needs and their preferences and those of their families as well. Anna Freud Centre particularly still involved, as well as the other originators, working with areas across the country to develop this model. So I Thrive, as you can see, it sits very much and really well within our overarching aim within Merton, that we want all children and young people in Merton to enjoy good mental health and emotional well-being and be able to achieve their ambitions and goals through being resilient and confident. I Thrive has 4 levels of support. Moving from left to right on that screen, from the sort of lower level or more universal, shall we call it, getting advice, which enables children and young people to self-manage conditions. It promotes that self-management and their resilience so that they can seek guidance and support themselves. Moving through to getting help services, and where we'll have these early interventions focusing on needs and outcomes. Then into getting more help, so more extensive treatment options, and then through to that crisis and urgent response in getting risk support. Sally, if you wouldn't mind moving on slides 1. Thank you. So within Merton, these are the services that we have in those different areas. So here we've called that universal level coping. So Couth as an online resource for children and young people to access themselves. It offers guidance and support, including from advisors with whom they can chat. MHSTs, you will see from our report that actually refers to our mental health in schools teams. There are mental health and schools teams available to all our schools in Merton, which is a significantly higher proportion than that seen nationally. And of course, there is a lot of information online from a range of different services, evidence-based, and evidence of impact on the web. In terms of getting help, so that next stage up, This is where, following the introduction of the iThrive model, there has been greater investment in those early intervention services. Off the Record provides counselling and support for children and young people across the borough. Again, Cooth sits very much in that space because there is the online advice and guidance. There are advisors online to whom they can chat, and again, mental health and schools teams sitting there as well. Moving on into getting more help. So this is where CAMS comes in, our Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, with referrals for that support coming in through our single point of access, the SPA. We also have embedded workers in special schools and our pupil referral units. So where the need is particularly high, that particular support. And I ought to say as well that we have CAMS workers embedded within our children's social care teams as well, supporting children children on a child in need plan and child protection plan, children in care, and also providing supervision for some of our social workers as well. And then the getting risk support. So this is where I suppose, yes, where the CAMS and social care team sits, it sits more acutely because this is where our particular acute matters arise. Again, CAMS sits there, and support within our youth justice service. And I think there is just one more slide. So this is just to refer a little bit more around our mental health and schools teams. We have our 5 clusters around which the mental health and schools teams are based. Our first cluster, which is led by Holy Trinity Primary School, we refer to the Trailblazer cluster. It was the first cluster in the borough and therefore was a trailblazer for us. You will see their work within the report as being particularly well embedded. We have a SEND cluster, which brings together our special schools, our schools with additionally resource provisions, and also this is a cross-borough cluster, so there are some schools in Sutton who are involved in that. We have our further education cluster led by South Thames College, and you will have seen the work that has been going on there, particularly around induction and that transition of children and young people from previous educational institutions into FE. And how important that is. You can imagine how important that is. They're developing more independence, and it's often quite a big leap for children and young people. We then have our Mitcham cluster, which is supported by Off the Record, and that is led by Hillcross Primary School. And finally, there is the Wimbledon cluster led by Bishop Gilpin Primary School. So, Chair, that's my brief introduction to the paper. And just again to say, so hopefully members have been able to have a look at this report. As I said, it outlines the key issues faced by our children and young people, the support that we provide, and some of the issues that are arising for our children and young people in this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that overview, Elizabeth. And with that, I will open it up to any questions. We'll take 3 at a time as usual, starting off with Councillor Kirby and then Councillor Hall and Councillor Flack.
Mine's not so much questions, but I really thought this is an excellent report. I mean, it made such good reading today. I was marking up in yellow, highlighting bits and pieces of it. I just felt the whole thing, because you know that we're doing the task group around self-harm and eating disorders, and it just felt like Merton was putting an enormous amount of energy into mental health, which is really very assuring. And also, I thought, looking at the stats where the figures there for eating disorders and self-harm were actually low, was again reassuring. I like the bit, I mean, I used to sort of have to monitor attendance at school, but I like the bit where they're looking at the first 2 weeks of young people attending school or not attending it and zoning in on that, because that was a kind of measure of where it could possibly go. And I thought that was really a really clever idea. I just thought the whole thing. I mean, the I Thrive system, the way the clusters have been put together. I just think it's a really fantastic piece of work. Well done.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. I'd like to echo what Councillor Kirby said. It was a very good report. I'd like to make a comment on sections 219, which is about the SEND cluster led by Cricket Green School. First of all, I was wondering if we can put on record our immense congratulations and thanks to Celia Dawson, OBE, who's the head of Cricket Green School. We went to visit there earlier in the year, and she really is doing an excellent job. And in particular, I was very interested in the play therapy pilot that's being developed there and rolled out. And I would like to ask that in future reports to this committee, we can find out a little bit more about that pilot and how it's going and where it's going to be rolled out to, because I think it's really, really useful therapy that would work not just in schools for special educational needs pupils, but mainstream. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Excellent report. I was just wondering, so if it's a two-part question, is what's being done in schools sort of around culture and support to try and stop kids getting to a point that they need mental health referrals? And also, I may have misunderstood, it seems to be quite reliant on self-referrals. So making sure that there are what is happening in schools to make sure the kids are aware that they need to self-refer, or are able to get the support within the schools and be referred.
Thank you. So I'll just pick up on the point about play therapy, and absolutely, Councillor Hall, we will talk about how that has landed. And one of the things that actually we didn't mention in the report, and I will just add here, a very recent development, our apprenticeship officer here in the council has recently set up the opportunity for play therapy apprentices to be developed within our schools. So that's a really exciting thing, and our primary schools were really particularly excited by that opportunity. With regards to what is happening in schools to try to prevent those mental health referrals, essentially that's what the mental health in schools teams are doing. So they are working very much in that early intervention and prevention space, and that will be both about working with children and young people in the schools, but also working with staff so that they are the staff are skilled up and empowered to develop that culture of supporting mental health generally. In terms of that focus on self-referrals, there is a particular focus. We are pleased in terms of the level of self-referrals to off the record, because although schools and other professionals can do that, it's an indication that children and young people know where to go and seek that support. The referrals to CAMS are obviously coming from professionals.
If I may, before we go to a second round of questions, I can see there are a few hands online, and I will go straight to them. But I just wanted to follow up from Councillor Flack's question and your responses, Elizabeth, on what preventative work is being done to support children with mental health concerns. There was a section on the report which looked at the reasons for referral to CAMS, and it laid out the key reasons the 5 big reasons why young people are referred to CAMS or self-referred to CAMS. I'm just wondering whether that information feeds into any specific preventative work, knowing what the key challenges are for young people. And also on that, just a clarifying question around what is meant by neurodevelopmental conditions. I just wasn't clear on what that term meant exactly within the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So indeed, those top reasons, both in terms of presenting problems for CAMS, but also for off the record, support discussion in our CAMS partnership board to identify the sorts of services that we need to check in that they're working well. I will just pick up on one, so anxiety. So although anxiety has reduced as a presenting problem for CAMS, as you will see for off the record, it is the top presenting need. And it is, I think, just to allude to Councillor Kirby's point, what we are aware of is the anxiety in the and school emotionally based school resistance. Or school avoidance. Sorry, EBSA. It's a really possibly an unfortunate term, but what we need to do there is to sort of work with children and young people around the anxieties that school presents for them to support their improved attendance at school. So there's a lot of work going on in that space, knowing that that is one of our biggest issues. Neurodevelopmental conditions. So our CAMS service provides diagnosis for children with a possible autistic spectrum condition, or I have forgotten the other condition. I'm just going to look as if yes. No, it'll come to me in a moment. But there are other neurodevelopmental conditions which are, in terms of diagnosis, where a diagnosis is required, and CAMS can provide that diagnosis. ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, would be another example of that. Sorry, that was the category that was escaping my memory.
Thank you for those responses. And now we'll jump into the second round of questions. I can see there are a couple of hands online, and so I will go to Councillor Hayes first, and then Ros for your questions. So please unmute yourself and ask your question, and then also Una as well.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh yeah, okay. Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the well wishes. In terms of, I had an accident and I broke my foot. But anyway, so yeah, the report's very good. I echo what the previous councillors have said in terms of the report, but I'm a little bit unclear what the logic is. Well, two things before I get on to that. Is it woven into any kind of presentation by the heads at the schools to the children themselves? I mean, how does that? This self-referral, I'm not quite sure I'm completely content with that. I just wonder whether there was any kind of verbal for the head teachers and teachers to reference this particular service without labouring the point. That's a direct question on that. Is it rolled out, as it were? The other one, the other question is about the clusters. What's the logic for the clusters? Because, and this is just first impression, so I can't say exactly this is what it is, but it seems a bit like based on income. You know, it's and I know the geography of the borough is, rich. I don't think I'm being crude saying this. The rich part of Maine, poorer part of Maine. And so what's the logic on the clusters? Is it just geography or is it socioeconomic data? Thanks.
Thank you, Billy, for your questions. Ros, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to say huge thanks in the first place to Keith Shipman and his team and Elizabeth's team, because the work that Merton has done around mental health, I think, has been trailblazing for a long time. As a head back in 2015, I know my school benefited from the CAMS being based in school. So to see how it's developed and evolved is tremendous, and I think a real credit to the whole education team. So thank you for that in the first place. I also just wondered if there was any data tracking around ethnicity and pupil groups that are accessing the support across the different clusters, and also if there's any additional support or time for the host schools and how they manage being the cluster lead. Thank you.
Thank you. And Una, would you like to ask your question, please?
Again, could I begin by echoing the plaudits from Ros? I think it's been a very impressive set of strategies to read about. My question goes back to the issue of, historically, I remember within some schools in Merton in particular, there was anxiety about how long it took to access services and waiting times and so on. I noticed there's a lot about audit and evaluation at the moment with iThrive and so on. My question is boldly, is this proving to be a speedier service with fewer delays in terms of the panoply of support available to young people in schools? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. I'll now hand over to Elizabeth for the answers.
I shall do my best. Councillor Hayes, if I understood, I hope I understood your questions correctly. The first one around how these services are presented to children and young people.
Yeah.
So I think this will be happening in a variety of ways, depending on the age of the child. In our secondary schools, for example, during the time of the pandemic, we created a really helpful leaflet, which was available for our children and young people and also their families, so that they could understand the variety of the services that are available. And in fact, that leaflet has stood the test of time, and it continues to be used. I think you would not find that in primary schools, because obviously self-referral from primary school age children would not be so appropriate, particularly for younger children. I would just like to take the question slightly more widely. What schools will be doing through, for example, tutor time in secondary schools, in assemblies, through PSHE lessons, is helping children to understand what good mental health is, and how they can develop habits to improve that mental health. I hope that answers your questions, Councillor Hayes. I'm sure you will come back to me if not. In terms of the logic for the clusters, they are broadly based on, some of them, as you can see, are based on geography. But what I will say is that all our schools in Merton have access through these clusters. So although you might think that we've got Bishop Gilpin in the west of the borough and Holy Trinity also in the west of the borough, leading two of the clusters, that Trailblazer cluster actually includes schools from across the borough, but it was a much more sort of a cross-borough initiative. And you will understand the logic for the SEND cluster and the FE cluster in terms of age group, and also bringing together understanding and supporting children with special educational needs. So all the schools are involved in a cluster. Rosa's question about data about ethnicity. I would need to go and check that. I'm afraid I don't have that readily to hand, and I would need to check the CAMS board minutes. But my understanding is there is data looking at ethnicity and other contextual factors for our children and young people to understand those who are requiring support. In terms of the additional support for host schools, the mental health in schools teams will themselves be providing some of that support for host schools, and it's also coming from the likes of Keith, from the likes of Jacqueline Wilson, who are the writers of this report, and their teams. And I have failed to write down Una's question properly, I'm afraid. So that's Una, would you mind just repeating? I'm sorry.
I think in essence, Elizabeth, it's about, is this set of strategies now, is it enabling more rapid access to support for young people? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So the first thing I'd like to direct members' attention to is within the paper towards the end, there is a link. I think it is paragraph. I'm just going to go back. There is a link in the report in paragraph 2.24. Which has the live data in terms of waiting times in the single point of access. So this has been a particular focus for our CAMS board. And as I click through on that live data, in Merton, so it covers the data across Southwest London. In Merton, the wait time to first contact in the last month in terms of numbers of days was 6.9 days. And to put that into context, the next closest local authority, that's 28.7 days. So it is significantly less than other local authorities in the local area. And one local authority has 81.4 days. So in terms of getting that support, it's really, and it's come down because there has been significant scrutiny and a lot of work, as you can imagine, in our single point of access. I think more broadly, Una, yes, it is meaning that there is better support earlier. Our schools can talk about the impact of off the record, the impact of our mental health in schools teams in that early intervention and prevention space.
Thank you for those responses, Elizabeth. I just wanted to touch on one of the questions you were asked around the demographics of the young people. I noticed in a section of the report which was talking about the data that off the record captures about young people. It mentioned that off the record is now capturing the sexuality of the young people who are self-referring to their service, but at the same time, schools are not capturing that information. I was just curious as to what the discrepancy is there. And I would also like to get your thoughts on, is there any additional data that we could be capturing from the young people who access these services that will better enable us to support the young people with their mental health, if there is a link between, you know, their background or preferences and the support they're seeking? Could you speak to that, please?
So I will need, I think, Councillor, to come back to you on both of those points, if I may. I think if Keith had been here to be able to present the report. Having said that, if is Vicky online? I'm just wondering if Vicky is able to support with this. Is Vicky Cameron there? No. So apologies, Councillor. I will need to come back. As I said, in terms of the addition, just in terms of your second point, the additional data, I would just want to check the CAMS board minutes and the way that things are being looked at scrutinised there. I am fairly certain that there is a range of, as I say, contextual information which will help us too. But I will provide an answer outside this meeting to members around that point around the discrepancy around off the record providing that sexuality data, but not done for schools, and what data we collect generally.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. And I wasn't meaning to put you on the spot. I just was wondering whether you had that information ready. And if I may as well, and this might be for something to follow up after the meeting. I also read in the data that off the record captured that whilst there's an overrepresentation of female clients self-referring for their service, you know, it's not the same when it comes to male clients, and I was just wondering whether there is a significant issue there around encouraging young males to take up these mental health services and to take ownership of seeking mental health support. Because I know when it comes to school referrals, then the gender balance is more equal there. So clearly there are challenges for both genders, but not enough males are self-referring. And I'm just curious as to whether there's something we can do there to encourage more males to step up and seek mental health support.
Thank you, Councillor. I would just refer to the work that's been done by Rutlish and by Wimbledon Colleges, our two boys-only secondary schools, where there is a proper understanding of the need, you know, the way that we work with boys and young men and encouraging them to come forward is really important. We know that boys and young men are less forthcoming. It's not just us in Merton, but they, for example, in their schools are very mindful of that, and it directs the way they work.
Thank you. I will look them up. We'll do another round of questions. And again, I'll take 3 questions, starting with Councillor Butcher, Councillor Howard, and then Councillor Flack.
I'll have a question first. I want Councillor MacArthur to go.
Oh, and Councillor MacArthur.
Hi, just 2 quick ones, if I may. So I haven't been in school myself when the last sort of financial crash took place, and remembering sort of the anxiety of my parents and teachers not really understanding the full situation. What sort of mental health implications on young people are we seeing stemming from the cost of living crisis? As sort of one question, and then sort of going on from the chair's point about mental health in young boys. What sort of effects are we seeing in young boys from the sort of rise of this sort of like online hatred and misogyny, this sort of Andrew Tate culture that is slowly starting to take grip in our secondary schools?
Councillor Howard, would you like to ask your question?
Certainly, yes. You were talking earlier about sexuality and closely linked to that, this is often conflated concept of gender identity, but gender identity is becoming increasingly prominent, and I'm wondering to what extent that is perhaps triggering mental health issues. I know that it's a very sensitive topic, full of eggshells, but nevertheless, I think there's a lot of concern that there is a proactivity within some schools to encourage children to question their gender identity. On the other hand, I'd be very pleased if children are coming in and young people are coming in with questions from what they're absorbing from outside, if that is being handled in an appropriate way. Is there a question in there? You understand the point I'm making, I hope. Thank you.
And Councillor MacArthur, your question.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question, well, two questions actually. One of them is about 2.24, and I did look up the data on that link, and it seemed to be giving the figures between referral and assessment. Now, does that include the figure when treatment actually starts, or can we see that figure? Because I'm concerned that they might be assessed as needing help, but when does that help actually start? Is that as soon? Because the figures are great that you're giving. I just wondered if that included when treatment started. My other question is just about the more possibly hidden disorders like eating disorders, where young people tend to hide them and self-harm as well. And I wonder how teachers or people are being taught to look for the signs of that, and also what help is being given to families in those situations to also look out for signs and where they are being signposted for help for themselves. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Butcher, your question around the mental health implications from the cost of living crisis, I think it is too early to be able to put some figures against that. I think we would be able to say that anecdotally, yes, children and young people are indeed worried, and they are seeing their parents being worried, and it's obviously affecting them themselves. So we will, it is something that we would be monitoring. Councillor Howard, I think you asked if there was a question in there, and I suppose in terms of gender identity, when young people are questioning their gender identity, it does obviously cause some significant confusion and can lead to mental health difficulties. I don't think I would be able to comment about proactivity by schools. I'm not aware, encouraging. Our PSHE curriculum asks us, our national guidance asks us to teach about all the protected characteristics, including gender. So that would be included within our PSHE as required. So I think that's as much as I would be able to answer at this point in time. And Councillor MacArthur, the figures until treatment were a little bit further down. Again, Merton, in terms of comparison with South West London boroughs, the average number of weeks that patients were waiting for treatment in Merton was 4.7 weeks. The next nearest borough was 7 weeks. And then in the borough where there are the longest waiting times, it's 35.3. So again, obviously recognising we need to have that treatment needs to happen as fast as possible. Eating disorders and self-harm. In paragraph 2.27, you might have noted the work that the London body, Transformation Partners in Health and Care, in terms of the principles, how to best support and meet the needs of this group, and it's developed guidance and resources to raise awareness of disordered eating more widely, and those webinars as well. So we have got that kind of support there, and I know that our local services would also be providing advice and support. In terms of advice for parents that I know our schools have considered, if not run, and I would need to check to absolutely finalize, but in terms of webinars for parents, so that there is an understanding of these issues for children and young people, how to recognize them, how to support them in the family. Okay. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, but Councillor Butcher, I forgot your second question. Yes, shall I come in quickly on in terms of the effects on boys and online misogyny? Again, our schools are very aware of that current threat, and these are the sorts of things that our networks, so for example, mental health leads in schools will be looking at and discussing how they can best address that. Apologies.
Okay, we'll have another round of questions. Chessie, would anyone else like to ask a question? This will probably be our final round of questions before we move on to the agenda. Chessie, do you want to ask your question? if there's no one else.
So, sorry, it's a bit. Obviously the fact that we're at 6.9 is excellent, and everybody else is much higher than that. What is it that's causing? What is it that we're? Are we doing something differently, better than the other boroughs? And if we are, what are we doing to share that best practice with them to try and support them as well?
And I just have a couple of last questions as well. The first one is around the mental health in schools teams. I know a lot of schools have taken up that service, but do we know how many schools have not taken up that service, and the reason why they haven't taken up that service? Because if I remember correctly, from the update in the report, it said not all schools had taken up the service. And my second question was, in the report, it mentioned a challenge recruiting therapists because of a national shortage. And yet we've got gaps to fill in terms of additional capacity in schools like Cricket Green, which was mentioned earlier, and all the fantastic work Celia does, as well as, for example, in the Youth Justice Service. So what is being done by the department to try and fill these gaps, mindful that, you know, there is a national shortage and it is tough, but it'd be good to get your views on that. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. So in terms of those figures, we would put it down to 2 points. One is the scrutiny that the CAMHS board have given this, and the work that has done through that board across the partnership to address the issue. And the second would be the concerted effort and additional resources that have been put into there by our CAMHS partners to be able to address it. In terms of sharing it more widely, I'm not sure I can answer that question. I would need to go away and ask colleagues whether we are doing anything about that. Mental health in schools teams, schools that have not taken up the service. I would say, councillor, it is less a case of not taking up the service and more differing degrees to which they have taken it up. And I would say that the engagement of our schools generally is very good indeed with the mental health in schools, and they really value them. Where schools feel less confident or less able to engage, it will be because there are other matters that they're needing to focus on. It's not because they don't recognise the issues that and the support that is there. So it is the work that we need to do with those schools to enable them to get to a position where they can take on board that support. Challenging recruiting therapists, that is definitely one I will need to take to, I think we need to refer that question to Vicky, who and colleagues in the ICB, if we can take that question out elsewhere.
Hey, I think Jane would like to make a contribution as well.
Yes, so I think in terms of sharing good practice, and it comes back a bit to the point about how we're ensuring the recruitment of therapists. It's something we'd be doing via the ICB. So there's certainly across South West London, I think a lot of interest in the iThrive model. There are a number of other boroughs that are using it. And certainly in terms of sharing that good practice around the mental health in schools teams, again, so we've had support from our, what was the CCG in terms of putting funding in. So again, I think we share that via the sort of the health footprint. Is how we would do that.
Thank you for that contribution, Jane. And in terms of the actions coming out of this discussion, Elizabeth, you send over that data in terms of the characteristics that are captured when a young person refers themselves for the service or are referred to one of our mental health services. Okay, are there any other actions I've missed there, Stella?
About recruiting therapists.
Oh, yes. Yes, and more information on that, on the challenge of recruiting therapists and the approach being taken there. Okay, with that, I'd just like to again reiterate the panel's appreciation of all the work that goes into providing these vital mental health services for our children and young people. It is a major issue for young people, not just in this borough, but nationally, and that's something that's been expressed in the past through the young people survey and task groups that have been done by this very panel in the past. And so it's really good to see the progress that's been made in this report, and also the efficiency of the service in comparison to other boroughs as well. But that's a very good sign as well. Thank you for that report and for the work that goes into this service. Now we'll move on to the next agenda item, which are the task group updates. And I'll start off by handing over to Councillor Kirby, whose task group is closely linked to what we've been discussing. And so over to you, Councillor.
Felt like a lot of work had been done for us there, which is good. But as you know, we started with our terms of reference and then met with Dr. Nahara from STEM, learned about the amazing apps they have that are available to families and young people. And then following on from that, Dr. Nahara was invited and myself to the secondary school heads meeting where she did a presentation. And following on from that, there was a meeting with Keith Shipman, who gave us a full background report on the current state of play so that we were given an update of what was going on in the schools. We then produced a survey for the schools to report back to us. And we were hoping to get that back in January, but because of school pressure, it didn't happen. And I think Christmas as well was in the way. So we will be attending the school's mental health forum when they meet in March to make sure that those questions are answered. I attended the Young Peer Educators event at the Chaucer a couple of weekends ago. It was very well attended and full of interesting information. And I spent time talking to a young woman from Cooth, which is a free counselling community supporting people and offering self-help tools that Merton's already fully engaged with. I was pleased to hear that the young people can get immediate help speaking to someone and that it's an anonymous and that you can sign up without a referral. I spoke to Healthwatch, who were there and were keen to be supportive. They mentioned BEAT, an eating disorder charity, which they suggested we check out whether they have a local ambassador. And they were keen to promote any information through their various networks once we get our final report together. At that same event, I met with Julia Groom, who I worked with when I was cabinet member for adult social care and health. So it was actually nice to meet up with her. And she referenced the Healthier Communities Scrutiny Panel report, which I again read today and thought that was again another really good piece of work. She contacted Vicky Cameron, who apparently is the lead integrated children's senior transformation manager. It's a bit of a mouthful, but she is. Who we hope will be speaking to us shortly. And the task group will be meeting, I would think, probably in the next couple of weeks to assess where we are and what we need to do next.
Wow, sounds like there's quite a bit been going on over the past few months. Thank you for that update, Councillor. Are there any comments or questions on the work that Councillor Kirby has put into her task group so far? Okay. Then Councillor Kirby, is there any support or assistance? Okay. but you'd like from the panel
No, we're
going
fine because
forward?
Keith Shipman's been very helpful and the people that we're speaking to have been very helpful too. So I think we're doing fine. We'll be fine.
Well, we of course really appreciate all the work you've put into this task group so far. It's not very common that councillors launch their own independent task group and put in all the work, and so it makes us appreciate everything you're doing even more. And if a time does come where you need input or support from the rest of the panel, please do feel that you can come to us for that. Thank you, Councillor Kirby. And I will now hand over to Councillor Austin, who's joining us online. And today's his first day joining the Children and Young People Scrutiny panel. But he has, of course, been chairing our second task group for a few months now. And I joined him on many of those meetings and seen that task group develop into something that's more specific and really targeted. But I won't say anything more because I don't want to steal his thunder. And instead, I will hand over to Councillor Austin to give us an update on the work of his task group. So, Councillor, please unmute yourself, and we look forward to your update.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me. I
Yes,
would,
we can, but we can't see you, but we can
love,
definitely hear you.
I don't think you want to, considering my camera is defunct at the moment, but nevertheless, Chair, as you'll be familiar, both yourself and Councillor MacArthur have been very engaged in this task group, as has indeed his Stella, and hopefully you will join in as you see fit in this presentation. So starting with the point of this task group, we heard from the council and Kenny around what they thought ought to be our priorities, and they'd identified that there was a lack of access to big finance in the borough, and that is for partly historical reasons that I'm happy to provide information for if councillors see fit. But Merton, in short, the third sector that is interested in youth is disadvantaged when compared to other boroughs in London. And that is something that we wanted to address. So increasing the access to funding is the starting point of the task group. And we've been looking at ways to rectify that. And I hope I'm not repeating things that other councillors will know, but the Young People's Foundations that have been operating in London and indeed around the UK seem at this stage of our inquiry to provide an answer to that. And just to give you in headlines, and hopefully it's a very succinct presentation will be circulated to you. The YPS joins fundraising on behalf of local groups. They help secure funding from new sources into the local area, but they don't just attract funding from that local area. And they build a local consortium to successfully secure commissions and tenders from a wide range of organisations, and that includes corporate and individual funding streams. And one of the things, and again, I'm happy to provide more information on this, in order to access what's called large finance, you need to be classified as a large organisation, which means that your income stream is measured in the hundreds of thousands of pounds per annum. And there aren't organisations in Merton, when compared to other boroughs, that fit into that measurement, which is why the answer is to be able to pull together the various different organisations that are doing work in this. And the YPF seems to be a solution that other boroughs have looked to. And just to tell you which other authorities have gone to this model, it includes Camden, Kensington, Chelsea, Harrow, Barnet, Brent, Westminster, Dorset, Manchester, which would be the city, as well as Hammersmith and Fulham. So other local London boroughs have opted for this model to begin pooling together resource. And to be clear, we haven't come up with this idea on our own. This is actually a unanimous recommendation from, and Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, the Merton Youth Partnership. The job of the task group is to assess why this was rejected a number of years ago by the council as an option. And we are speaking to individuals and organisations who have been part of this process for a long time and understanding why they have begun to transition their opinions from being opposed to being supportive. And we've met with AFC Wimbledon, we've met with the Youth Partnership and a range of deliverers that are part of that organisation. And we're going on to meet with Brent Council and other authorities that have followed a different model to decide whether or not the YPF is the solution we've been told it is, and whether or not it is fit to Merton. And finally, and if we opt for this, I hope most constructively, how we begin in Merton delivering and creating the actionable steps required to create the Merton Young People's Foundation. But Chair, if I may, I defer to yourself and Councillor MacArthur, who are in the chamber, to pick up any problems or questions or things that they think I've missed in this presentation. Of course, I'm very happy to answer any questions that colleagues might have.
Thank you very much, Councillor Austin. And I don't know about Councillor MacArthur, but I think you've summarised the journey of the task group and where we're currently at, as well as where we're going really well. And so I have nothing further to add to your brilliant updates. I don't know if Councillor MacArthur wants to add anything.
No, I agree. That was great. Nothing to add. Thank you.
So any questions or comments from other panel members to Councillor Austin on the task group? Okay, Councillor Austin, similar to the question I asked Councillor Kirby, is there any additional support you would like from the panel?
Thank you, Chair, for this for the question. All I would say is, and again, I've not done a task group before, but given that we are dealing with a concept which, for various reasons, has been proposed and rejected in the past, all I would ask colleagues on this panel is to not consider the model, just the model that we propose, but also the journey that the voluntary organisations have gone on in recent years to recommend this model as something for us to consider meaningfully. And also bear in mind their unanimous recommendation that this model is something that they would be happy to support. So apologies, Chair, not a question, more of a request or a statement, but thank you.
No, I think it was a a good point to clarify, because that has been our experience from the various groups that we've talked to. They've all been strongly in favour of this model, and so I think you're doing those groups justice by emphasising that point. I think we have a question or comment from Councillor Hayes. So if you want to unmute yourself, Councillor, and ask your question or make your comment.
Yeah, I am. Max actually sort of like prompts really. The question I'd ask Max is, when was it rejected previously? I mean, just because something was rejected in the past doesn't mean to say that we can't accept it or get that, particularly as it's been unanimous. But when was it rejected in the past, and what was the central point as to why it was rejected? I'm not saying just because it was rejected in the past doesn't mean, you know, we're a different group of people, but I'd like to know when that was and what was the reason, Max. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes.
Question, Councillor Austin.
Of course, I will get to you the date when the rejection happened, just because I can't be sure off the top of my head. We asked this question, as you won't be surprised. And what came, and again, please, councillors, the chair or Councillor McCarthy, please interject to comment on this. This is more to do with the organisation of the third sector relevant to this area in the borough than it does to the council. And coming over some of their concerns, partly because you're pooling resources together, does this, will they end up in competition with each other for competing for similar sources of money? This one, would this impact on their own fundraising? And they have now come to a decision that it won't. I think the second point, and again, I'm very happy to direct you to the people that told this to us, was that the group itself, the partnership that actually would effectively become the foundation, the first people involved in foundation, have, I think, gone on a journey themselves, and their own individual organisations have developed over the past years. In terms of remit, just as I said, I can't give you the precise date for memory. We're not talking decades. We are talking the last, within the last 8 years. But they now feel that their own concerns have been sufficiently addressed. And again, welcome comments from other councillors. This wasn't due to some absence of provision from the council. It's purely internal things that they wanted to work through, and I, as far as I understand, have done so.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Councillor Austin. Thank you.
Thank you for that update, and for all that you do as chair of this task group. We really do appreciate all the hours you've put into specifying the focus of that task group into something that in a month's time or so we can bring to scrutiny to approve or give us any additional feedback. And before we wrap up this section, I'd just like to make a small correction when I was speaking about the task group that Councillor Kirby is leading on. I know that Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Hall have worked collaboratively with Councillor Kirby on that task group. And so I just wanted to make that correction. Sorry, it's slipped my mind. And so in terms of next steps for these task groups. I know for Councillor Kirby, you've got your survey coming up, and we hope that survey goes well, and look forward to seeing the findings of that survey. With Councillor Austin's task group, we've got a few meetings coming up with other boroughs that use the YPF model or other models, which will feed into your final reports. And so the next update will hopefully be the completed reports from both task groups, which will give our whole panel a chance to scrutinize the recommendations in those reports, and to decide on the next steps for those reports, and whether we want to make forward those recommendations onto cabinet or to the relevant bodies involved in that piece of work. But thank you again for what you've done with those task groups. And thank you for joining us tonight, Councillor Austin. Please do feel free to sign off now if you'd like. You're also welcome to tune in for the rest of the meeting as well. Thank you for your attendance. We'll now move on to the departmental update, and I will hand over to Jane to highlight any particular items, or we can just move straight into questions.
So I don't have any particular items to update, but I thought it might be really helpful just to let the panel know, in case you weren't aware, that last week on the 2nd of February, the government published its response to the independent review into children's social care. So I'm not suggesting we take detailed questions on this. I'm still working my way through all of those documentations, but I thought it'd be worth just giving you a bit of an overview. So they have published a strategy, and that strategy is called Stable Homes Built on Love, Stable Homes Built on Love, and it has 6 pillars within it. That's how they're calling the different strands. And so I'll just give you the titles of those, and then what we'll do is make sure for the next time we meet that we have a paper with a summary of that for you. So pillar 1 is about family help. So family help provides the right support at the right time so that children can thrive with their families. Pillar 2 is around a decisive multi-agency child protection system. Pillar 3 is unlocking the potential of family networks. Pillar 4, putting love, relationships and a stable home at the heart of being a child in care. Pillar 5 is a valued, supported and highly skilled social worker for every child who needs one. And the last pillar, pillar 6, a system that continuously learns and improves and makes better use of evidence and data. So they've published a strategy, and that strategy also has a consultation attached to it around the proposals, and running alongside that are 2 other consultations, one around a new national framework and dashboard for children's social care, which asks for views on the proposed outcomes and indicators, and a consultation on a set of national rules on the engagement of agency social worker resource. So 3 consultations, which obviously we'll have a look at in detail and bring back to you further for discussion. So the response to all of those consultations is by the 11th of May.
Thank you for that update, Jane. And am I right in assuming that you're going to provide that summary at the next meeting? Okay, on the 15th of March.
It's because I think that'll give us time to have a bit of thinking about it, a bit of discussion. So we'll do a sort of manageable summary, because obviously it's quite a long document, but we'll do a manageable summary, and that'll allow us a bit of time to have some thinking and discussion before we are then putting together that response.
We appreciate you going through the whole report and providing us with a summary. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll jump into any questions regarding the content of the departmental update. We have had Again, I'll take questions in threes, starting off with Councillor Hall, and then Councillor Charles, and then Councillor Butcher.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the Director for another good report. I'd like to start off just by saying very well done to Wimbledon Park Primary School for its outstanding Ofsted. That's really encouraging. Could I ask how many schools have actually dropped in performance? And also, sorry, I'm going to throw a few things together here. I noticed in 2.31 that swimming lessons were included in the holiday activities and food programme, and it mentioned that some pupils had never been in a swimming pool before. I just wondered, at what age do swimming lessons become a regular occurrence for school children? I believe it's a statutory duty, isn't it, to provide swimming lessons for primary school children, but I'm not sure at what age that kicks in. That was it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions, Councillor Hall. And if I could just add to one of the questions you asked around the Ofsted inspections. Of course, we're pleased with the schools that received good Ofsted ratings. That is very welcome news. But it would be good to also hear a bit about specifically Hatfield Primary School, which received a requires improvement Ofsted grade, and I'm particularly focusing on this school because it's marked as a school for expansion of additional resources provision, and so is that still on the table considering the Ofsted rating? And could you give us a bit more information on what is in that school's improvement plan to get it from requires improvement to good? And Councillor Charles, do you want to ask your question, and then we'll get Councillor Butcher's question?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a bit more information about, you're saying that a new special free school has been approved, so I just really wanted some more information about that. What sort of age group would that be, and where in the borough would it be? Thank you.
So the other night I had a question from a couple of residents about the Just Learn school in Cricket Green, and I didn't know too much about it, so I went and did some research, and it seems to be a behavioural specialist independent school. So I just wanted to know if you could tell me a bit about it and a bit more about what sort of we're providing with regards to students with severe behavioural issues in the borough. Thank you.
Yes, please, Elizabeth, do you want to take those questions?
Thank you. I will take the questions around Ofsted, swimming, and Just Learn, and I think in terms of the specials free school, I'll then come to Richard. So to take the question about how many schools have dropped their category, one school has dropped, which is Hatfield. It was judged to require improvement, having been a good school before. So then to pick up your questions, Councillor Kouisa, about the support for that school. So we have a very robust school improvement strategy, which we develop every year in conjunction with our schools, where we support our schools in line with need. So there is, as with all our schools, we are providing that appropriate support within the school improvement strategy. I think it would probably be inappropriate to comment in terms of specifics around its school improvement plan. But I can say that, you know, the majority of schools where they get areas for development within their Ofsted report, a school improvement plan will be absolutely focused on those areas for improvement. And that's whether the school has a good outcome or requires improvement outcome, or even an outstanding outcome, because there will always be those points. In terms of the expansion of the ARP, the leadership of the school is strong leadership. The leadership in the school started in September. The school was inspected in October. And in terms, therefore, of the expansion of the ARP, it will continue. It has already started, and the work that leaders are doing there is good work. In terms of swimming, so there is a requirement within the national curriculum that either in Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2 pupils should be taught to, and I will just read it in terms of what it says in the national curriculum, to swim competently, confidently and proficiently over a distance of at least 25 metres and using a range of strokes, and perform safe self-rescue in different circumstances. Different schools will be approaching that in different ways. Our schools will be using the local resources in swimming pools to either do blocks of lessons, intensive blocks of lessons, and that can happen in any year group. They generally, you know, they will say, actually, in our school, we'll be doing it in year 3, for example, and then there might be top up towards the end of Key Stage 2 to try and catch those children who haven't yet been able to achieve that milestone. Just Learn is an alternative provision in the borough. So it is, it's an independent school. It's inspected by Ofsted. As an alternative provision, children may be placed there where they have particular needs, where that school can meet them. The vast majority of our schools with who have behaviour that challenge are supported through our pupil referral unit at Canterbury campus and the various offers that they have there.
Thank you. So the application we made to DfE, which was accepted, was for an all 3 schools, so primary and secondary special school, up to the age of 16, up to 120 places. I can't tell you where that will be, other than it will be in Merton. Our ambition is it should be more central to the borough, as our 3 other special schools are towards the east of the borough. But at the moment, the stage we're at the moment is working with DfE on site options. And obviously, we'll bring that back to you when we're clear where it might be.
Before we go to a second round of questions, if there are more questions from members, I just wanted to follow up on the answer around Hatfield, especially around the ARP going ahead. Could you share sort of what specific additional resource provision that school is going to focus on?
Hatfield has had an additionally resourced provision in place for a number of years now. So this is an expansion of the provision that was already in place, which is for children with an autistic spectrum condition. So those additional places will be there to support those children. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Guisa.
Yes, it does answer my question. But there was also another question I wanted to ask about Hatfield. I know you said it wouldn't be appropriate to share the school improvement plan, but if I wanted to find that information outside of this forum, where can I get that information? Will it be directly from you? Do you want me to rephrase the question?
So it wouldn't be appropriate to share. It's an internal document. It's not in the public domain. As a document. And I would want to reassure you, Councillor, that everything is being done with the school, to support the school, to challenge the school, to make the improvements. We have a clear vision within the council that all schools should be as good as they possibly can be. And I will refer again to our robust school improvement strategy, which will support that journey.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Are there any other questions? First of all, I'm going to turn to members online before I go to any questions in the chamber. Are there any members online who would like to ask a question? No? Okay, we'll take maybe one more round of questions from members in the chamber. Councillor Charles, Councillor Hall, and Councillor Kirby.
Yes, I was interested. You mentioned children from Ukraine, and I've been having discussions with my colleague, Councillor Scrutiny, about his work with the Polish Family Association. Now, one thing he did tell me was that the people from Ukraine, they use the Cyrillic alphabet and obviously keyboards. So I wondered how are you finding being able to teach them if they use a different alphabet, basically?
Councillor Hall, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. Just a quick one. Looking to right at the end of the report, sections 2.33 and 2.34, I note the great range of HAF programs that are being carried out. And I just wondered whether, with the emphasis on healthy eating, whether cooking lessons are included, and whether children at special schools or with special educational needs are provided with the opportunity to learn how to cook healthy meals for themselves. And if they aren't currently provided, could they be? Thank you.
And that also links really well with a section on the report around expanding half provision to children with special educational needs. And there was a comment there on the consultation work that's ongoing to help with rolling out this provision to more children. And I'll just adding to Councillor Hall's question, I was just curious as to who you're consulting with regards to supporting you with rolling out this HAF provision to students who have a special educational need or a disability. Councillor Kirby, do you want to ask your question?
Mine's in section 221. It's also the Holiday Activities Fund. And that is, you mentioned polka and Wimbledon Theatre, but there's Colour House Children's Theatre as well, which I chair the charity, but I also write the musicals for that and the pantomime at Christmas. And so, and I can declare that there's no financial interest because I do it for nothing. But our pantomimes at Christmas, you'd be very welcome to send children our way. I'm just surprised that we didn't get a mention.
Yes, Elizabeth, do you want to take the questions?
Thank you, Councillor Kirby. I'll start with that one first. That's a really helpful pointer. So thank you. I'll take that back to the coordinator as something that we can think of. Great, thank you. Thank you. Cooking lessons. So there, when we talk about healthy eating and healthy food, the opportunities for children to be involved in the preparation of the food, I know that is happening in HAF. I'm not sure how that is happening for our children with special educational needs and disabilities, so I will go back and check that. But as we've noted in the report, we want to focus now on increasing the opportunities for children with special educational needs and disabilities to benefit from HAF. So if it's not happening, we can take that back in. Councillor Kawisa, in terms of the consultation, so I was just struggling to find the reference because I'm not we're working with a sector. I suppose if by consultation you're meaning how we will roll this out. So we're speaking to providers, we're speaking to the schools to see what else can be done, what else they might need to be able to make HAF more inclusive or more focused and supportive for those children. I think if that's by what you're meaning by consultation, that's the sort of thing that we're doing.
Yes, I was referring to that, but I was also wanting to learn whether the organizations and institutions you are speaking to are all within borough or some are out of borough.
So some of our HAF providers provide across borough. The majority of them are absolutely local. But where we do have HAF providers who maybe cross borough boundaries, then we would be engaging with them. Yeah.
Are we doing that in situations where we don't have that service in borough, or
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. So trying to expand and to think differently. Yes, we will be thinking about maybe different providers as well. So trying to reach out to potential other providers. Yes. That's what we would be doing. If I come to the question around Ukrainian children and supporting them in schools. Supporting children with English as additional language is a strength in our schools, I would say, knowing the work that has been going on. And I would say that the obvious thing to say is that there will be children who speak Arabic in our schools. There will be children who speak Urdu. There will be children whose alphabet is different. So the strategies for our Ukrainian children are the same for other children in a similar sort of circumstance. It's about immersion. It's about taking them through the spoken language, encouraging interactions with other children, and then making the link with the written language, which will look different indeed. But would welcome, I'm sure our equalities advisor, if you wanted to find out some more, I'm sure would be happy to talk more about that.
Okay. Before we close up this agenda item, I just had one last question myself on the family hubs, and whilst I can understand the benefits of joining up the delivery of all of these family focused services, I can appreciate the benefits of that approach. And I know at the moment you're in the process of trying to do this using a collaborative approach in terms of like putting together the program. And as part of that collaborative approach, I just wanted to understand a bit more about who you're planning on consulting and including in these task and finish groups or workshops, or whatever means you're going to use to get input from the various interested parties in putting together these family hubs, so that they are done with community engagement, and when they are rolled out, they do meet the specific needs of the community. And I know that the report specifically mentioned areas like Cricket Green and Long Thornton. So, I suppose you could say I've got an interest in that respect as well. But I just want to get some more information, more clarity on how you're going to engage community groups in designing the program for these family hubs.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of who's involved, I think in that wider sort of professional sector, just to talk about health. So health commissioners, health providers. So again, referring to our ICB colleagues, but also the range of providers who are out there. The voluntary sector. It is services across the council. So it is being able to reference the support that there are for adults. So when they come with family help, they want family help. It's not just about help for the children, it's within that family, what is the help that is available for adults. In terms of engaging the community, this is a really key thing for the way that not just the way that we are expected to roll it out from the national direction that we're being told, but we know how important it is, and it is placed at the heart of our development plans. So there will be consultations with communities, with parents, as we develop those services. And then importantly, in an ongoing way, parents and communities involved in the governance of the programme.
Thank you for those answers and for taking the questions of other panel members on the various aspects in this report. In terms of actions following the departmental update, the only one I noted down here was Councillor Hall's question on information regarding the cooking classes for children with special educational needs and getting that follow-up information for Councillor Hall. And also Cabinet Member Kenny, did you want to, I saw you raise your hand before, did you want to make a comment before we move on? Please do.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, from Councillor Hall's point, I quite agree with you. It's very concerning if any school slips its standards and it's not what we want. But I'd like to point out 95% of our schools are good or outstanding, where the national average is 89%, but we don't think 95 is good enough. We want to be 100%, and that's the aim, and the challenge and support group is there to try and support that achievement. So that's one thing we really want to keep our eye on. And I just wanted to point out something you brought up, Councillor Hill, some while ago, but just to reassure everyone in the room that we have to meet our safety valve challenge, but this will never be at the detriment to any of our children. Merton's priority is to provide for the children in our schools and meet their needs. And if it comes as extra costs, so be it. But we are working very hard to provide much more of the education of children's needs in Merton. And we've just had the opening of Whatley campus that has at the moment got 40 children that are now educated in Merton that may have gone outside of Merton, and that keeps costs down because it would be more expensive to have them in a borough outside of Merton, and also keeps transport costs down. And the work, as Richard explained, about looking at another development for special educational needs, it is to keep our children in Merton, to be educated in Merton, in their home environment as much as is possible. But having said that, there will always be some that need specialist education that we cannot offer in Merton, and it's probably the complex residential care they need. So it is a balance, and I have to say I'm very impressed with the departmental's work to achieve this. I think it's excellent work going on to provide for our children, but manage the budget too. And I totally endorse your suggestion of home economics in school. One of my best grades in school, I think it's the detriment to our society that we don't have it as on the curriculum at every level of education.
Thank you very much for that contribution. We'll now close this agenda item and move on to the last item, which is, of course, the work programme. And I don't have a big update here, just that for our next CYP in March, the focus of that panel will very much be on our responsibility as corporate parents, alongside a few other agenda items. But I know that's something that members were interested in when we put together the work programme, and so that will be the focus of our next panel. And so with that, I can bring this meeting to a close and thank everyone for their contributions. Thank our officers for all the hard work they put into compiling these reports and taking all of our questions. And I hope you have a safe journey home, and I will see you at the next panel in March. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Stella for putting me online.